Hi, my name's Megan. I'm a therapist and coach, and you're listening to Career Congregation Podcast. I created this podcast to inspire people in their careers. After spending hundreds of hours working with clients, one thing I noticed that so many people have in common is just how many people truly don't enjoy their work, or worse, hate what they do every day. I created this podcast to help people start to make changes in their everyday life so they too can find work they love. Every week, I speak with people who've made changes, taken risks, or built careers in ways that feel meaningful to them. These conversations are here to offer real life inspiration, perspective, stories, and practical ideas you can apply in your own life, whatever your industry or whatever career stage you're at. If you enjoy these interviews and are curious about what it's like to work with me one-to-one, you can find details of how to work with me in the show notes. Thank you and enjoy. Hello, hello. Welcome everyone to this week's episode of Career Congregation. I'm really excited today to be joined by my esteemed former course instructor, current supervisor, and someone who has had a lot of influence and impact in my life over the last few years, Elizabeth Betts. Welcome, Lizzie. Lizzie was one of my course instructors, the lead course instructor for my program when I was training to be a therapist. So she's known me for quite a few years now, and she has seen me through many hurdles, personal and professional, and has been by my side guiding me all the way up to my current position. As soon as I qualified and started working as a therapist, I decided I wanted to keep her in my life, so she became my supervisor. So she has literally been with me through every single client that I've ever worked with. If any of my clients are watching this, this is my supervisor. This is Lizzie. Lizzie is a psychodynamic therapist. She works with couples and children and individuals. Yeah. She's also obviously a course instructor. She's had several postings in schools and instructing. And she is a qualified supervisor. So she works with people that are qualified therapists with maintaining their caseload in private practice. And she's also now the founder of Aphrodite School of Counselling and Psychotherapy. So very accomplished. And yeah, anyone who knows her, we all just love Lizzie. So thank you for joining us today, Lizzie. How are you?
Fine, thank you. Thank you for that introduction. It's lovely.
No worries. Where are you dialing in from today, Lizzie?
So I'm in London.
I am in Dublin, so we're not too far from each other. So, given all of that information of all your impressive titles and everything, can you let the listeners know a little bit about your early influences, kind of cultural background and upbringing?
Yeah, so I grew up in London. Thinking about my early influences, I'm guessing mainly I'd think about my dad and my granddad. They'd come to mind first of all. My dad and my granddad had a very strong work ethic. I grew up. Mum was the main caregiver. Dad was working a lot, would come home at weekends and spend lots of time with us. But I sort of remember seeing that growing up, him sort of working all hours for us. And Grandad was the same, but he also had this real love for children. And so there were always children around the house. And he was always like chief person to take us all to school. And he'd have like collect them all from all the houses around the streets and take us all up to school and stuff like that. And I remember he's so sweet. And I remember looking at him from a very young age and thinking like, that's the person to be. Like, everybody loved him. He was just so sweet and so caring of everybody, and he was really an inspiration.
I think that you have definitely taken that on. I can see that.
Thank you.
Yeah. So that was all in London or?
Yeah, I grew up in South London, So my
South
whole
London.
life, yeah, in the same house. So,
Wow, that's pretty amazing, actually.
yeah.
I have no idea what that would be like.
I think I got the best of both worlds growing up actually, because I spent the week in the middle of London and I was so close to everything that I could get into the centre of London really easily. And the
Hmm.
weekends, Dad would take us out into the countryside and we'd spend the weekends like in nature. It was I got the best of both worlds, I have to say.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. British countryside. It's my heart is there. I love
Me
it
too.
so
Me too.
much. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So when you embarked on your professional journey, how did that start? Like school and training? Like what led you to the path that you took?
To be honest, when I was at school, I really struggled. I couldn't read at the age of 7. But
Oh,
what,
wow.
yeah, not at all. But I was very skilled at hiding it. So I got through all those years of school with no teachers picking up on the fact that I couldn't read, because what I could do was retain information. So we'd have story time on the mat all together, and I could memorize books that had been told months before, word for word. So what I was doing was just taking the books home that may have been read, what would have been read at some point, and would just recite them. So the teachers, when they were listening to me read, would think that I could read the words, but I was just reciting them from memory. So I got away with that for quite some time. And then
That must have been
someone's,
really stressful.
do you know, I don't think, from my memory, I don't think I really realised. I was just compensating for what I couldn't do. I did find school stressful. I remember dissociating a bit, because if I couldn't remember, not if I couldn't remember, if I couldn't understand something, I'd get quite stuck on it, and then I couldn't move on until I understood it. So sort of to compensate from the stress of that, I think I'd just switch off. And then for some reason, it didn't occur to me to be that worried about the things I couldn't do. I was very aware of the things that I could do, and I lent
Hmm.
more into them naturally and managed to sort of get by on that. And until obviously it was discovered that I couldn't read, and then they'd sort of tried to support me in that. And then I went into secondary school, and again really sort of struggled with the traditional ways of learning. So if I'm honest, I went to school to be social. I didn't really go to learn, but
Yeah.
I had some really good teachers. I had an English teacher who was amazing, and sort of would say to me when I had exams, go to the back of the paper first, and write the stories, because we used to have to use, was it at the back of the exam papers, you'd have to
For
write
the working out and stuff.
something. Yeah, and
Yeah.
my imagination was good, so she'd say go and do that first, and that's where you'll get all of your marks. So she kind of encouraged the bits that I was good at, and I was good at music and things like that. So I kind of never, I suppose I had a attitude of being a little bit like, oh, the things I couldn't do I wasn't that interested in, and the things that I could do I put everything into. So by the time I left school, I was a bit like, I don't know what I want to do. The bits that I like are music, and I didn't really know what I wanted to do. And I was a bit too young to do any kind of jobs where there was any kind of real caring professions, which I was also interested in. And my dad sort of listed all of these things. I suppose that was traditionally caring roles. Maybe that was a bit more for girls at the time, I guess. So it's sort of nursing and childcare, and sort of all the lists that I was given. I kind of thought, okay, maybe I'll try childcare. And so I went in to that, and I studied that in college. And that's when I first came across Freud and Bowlby and Piaget, and that kind of sparked that interest for me in counselling and human
Psychodynamic.
development. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
yeah.
yeah. So for the listeners that don't know, psychodynamic is like the studying of our development from our early years, like from infancy, till you're fully grown. So, but with a real emphasis on that. And Freud is one of the grandfather of that, essentially. So,
Yes.
um, okay. So then how many years before you then qualified to become a therapist?
Well, so I worked in childcare in different areas. I worked in schools, and then I worked as a nanny for 17 years
Oh,
before
wow.
I came into it.
I've nannied on and off, but for 17 years, that would
Yeah.
be, that's a lot. Wow.
Yeah, I mean, I studied it. I studied alongside being a nanny as well. So for the 4 or 5 years that I was studying, I was the nanny during that time as well. But yeah, I sort of I really loved the job, and it kept me in it for and I was again really fortunate to be able to be quite creative in the schools that I worked in. So I really could, because I was a teaching assistant when I was in the schools, and
Mm,
so they allowed me to be part of the planning. So again, I managed to be really quite creative with the activities that we were doing for the children to help them with their learning, and I could adapt things to different learning styles, and I'd see how well the children would thrive. So, and then when I stopped working in schools and I did nanny instead, I had the freedom to be quite creative and help them develop in the way that they learn best. So,
mm,
I sort of spent a lot of time kind of thinking, oh, should I be a counsellor or should I be a teacher? And I could never quite decide.
oh, wow.
Yeah, and I mean, to be honest, one of my very first relationships that I was in, his mother really struggled with mental health and addiction. And so I
Mm,
spent very early teenage years, was in my early teenage years, going into mental health hospitals, visiting her, and was I didn't understand it. So it was quite frightening, some of the things that I saw. Maybe I wasn't quite emotionally ready for it. And so that put me off for a little while, because that's how I understood mental health to be.
mhm,
And then after that, I had my daughter with him, and then we separated. And a few years down the line, his niece came to live with me, and she lived with me for many years. And she's wonderful, and I've got a lovely relationship with her still now.
mm,
But she really struggled with her mental health, understandably, with what she'd
yeah,
been through. And I didn't have the understanding then of mental health to the degree that I do now. And it was a very challenging time, but it was also a very rewarding time. I would never not do that. If I had the time again, I'd do it again. But I think that kind
yeah,
of pushed me into the counselling. I sort of from that decided that's the route I wanted to go into. And so I studied for it, and I did my level 2 and 3, and just loved the psychodynamic part. It just made sense to me. So that's what
yeah,
I did. I went down that route and specialised in the psychodynamics. And it was actually from there, one of the teachers, not on the actual course, it was when I went to do my BA in counselling. He was the head of the department at the time. He wasn't a counsellor, but he asked me in an interview what I'd like to do with my career sort of as I went on. And I'd sort of mentioned that I always sort of pivoted between counselling and teaching. And he'd obviously kept that in his mind. And when a job came up teaching at that college, he called me and actually asked me to come in for an interview. So he got me into the teaching side of it. So I actually ended up doing both.
yeah. And I mean, you still do. So you've been able to incorporate both into your career, which I can appreciate. I've always worked in marketing roles, and it's something I enjoy, networking and connecting and like outreach to people. Like I really enjoy that. So I've always said I'm love being a therapist, but that's one of the things that I do, and I do
Mm,
multiple things. So I
mm,
can, yeah, I can really appreciate that. And I also think it speaks such like volumes that you've always had like such a strong nurturing side to you, like all your experience with kids, but
mm,
also all of the people that I know who are therapists, it's always because of our personal lives that drive us
mm,
to become interested in that field. And
mm,
so, it was the experiences that you went through, witnessing mental health difficulties and also supporting people without the training makes you aware that you want that training. And for me, that
Mm,
was, I had multiple experiences when I was younger where people would come to me for advice. People always open up to me. And I always, when I got a bit older, I was like, I want to be able to talk about this stuff and with a qualification, and it was really important to me. And then I had a relationship in the run up to my training where there was a lot of there was some mental health struggles and
mm,
depression, and I really wanted to be able to hold him
mm,
emotionally. And I mean, I did actually probably way more than I should have, but I didn't know, I didn't have the qualification. So that was also a really big motivator for me.
yeah,
So
absolutely.
yeah, everyone, it's, the wounded healer archetype that everyone talks about. It's either you've been through something and you didn't feel supported, so then you
Yeah,
did get the help, and then that's made you want to help people, or you were in a situation where you wanted to
mm,
do more, but you realized that you didn't have the professional qualifications. It's always one of those two that drives people to become therapists.
well, it gives you the empathy, doesn't it? It helps you to be able to step into someone else's experience because you've been through
Mhm.
difficulties yourself.
Yeah. Yeah, so on that front then, moving into your teaching roles, what led you to start Aphrodite School of Counseling and Psychotherapy? Can you tell us a bit more about your latest venture?
Yeah, I mean, it's always something that I've kind of, since I started teaching counselling, that I've thought about doing. Counselling is such a unique training because, it's not like maths or, where you sort of go in and you get taught the subject and then you go off and you do whatever career, it's it's a career where you have to start with yourself. And so
Yeah.
it's I always sort of when I start with a class, I always sort of talk to them about it being a little bit like boot camp. It's like, they really have to go into themselves and they really have to look at themselves and understand themselves and learn about themselves. And it can be really quite hard going. And that's why they're in therapy themselves, because we have to, I guess, therapy, you go to therapy as a trainee for the benefit of your clients later down the line, because if you don't know you and you haven't healed parts in you, that's going to come out in the work.
Yeah, I always say that if there's something that you haven't worked through yet, it will come in and sit in the therapy chair across from you.
Yeah,
Like
that's the client you're getting, absolutely.
every
Yeah,
trigger that I've ever like ignored or like not worked through in therapy has then arrived as a client. And I've been like, oh,
absolutely.
damn it. Yeah.
Absolutely. So, there's that sort of real emphasis for me on the training being about the training, not being about other things that, can come along with um, sort of trainings where there's multiple different courses going on at the same time. It's really unique and it has to be seen as unique. And the students need that extra amount of support and pastoral
Yeah.
care, I suppose, throughout. You need to be able to give that. And the other thing as well is that the counselling training quite often draws in people that are coming to it as a second career. So perhaps they've never done any academic writing, or they haven't for a long time, or perhaps they struggled with that when they were at school and they didn't go on and do any further training. They went and got a job or whatever it was that they did. But the academic part isn't the bit that they are strongest at, shall we say. And so they'll come in and I will see such wonderful skills that will make them such amazing therapists. And of course,
Hmm.
they don't need the academic writing in the room with the client, right? They need to be able to be empathic and be able to interpret or understand the client's world, understand themselves in that room. And, so it doesn't really matter what grade they get in the classroom, it matters how they are in with the client. But they really were struggling with the academic writing and sort of passing. And I'd sometimes see it the other way as well. I'd see the ones that were really good academically, but struggled a bit more. I'm generalizing, no, there's obviously different
Yeah.
ways of learning, but you know, might struggle a bit more in the room with a client. So being able to adapt the learning to, or the ways that I talk to the learning styles of the person, and being able to adapt the assignments, for me, it has always been a really important thing to be able to do. And of course, some places that I've worked, I could be a little bit more flexible with that, others I couldn't. So for me, I really wanted to start a training school where the focus was on self-development and on meeting the learning style and the learning need of the trainee counsellor.
Yeah. Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. And we touched on it before I started recording, just looking at kind of like education in general and how far, well, how much it's evolving, right?
Mm,
Especially now that we have so much more technology available to us as humans.
yeah.
Like there's no reason why we have to be like sitting at a desk,
Mm,
just using like pen and paper. And, there's so many ways that we can learn, and we know
mm,
so much more in the field of education of different learning
mm,
styles. And like some people are visual, some people are more audio, and like some people are experiential. And so it's really good to
mm,
have programs that can cater to everyone and all the different learning styles, because I mean, I definitely had that experience in school. um I was like kind of lucky, like I've always been a really good writer, but there were definitely, I really thrived in photography because we got to go outside and with the camera, and I could be creative, and I loved being in the dark room and kind of like doing my own thing. But then when it was like, math, oh my God, like we have to sit in the desks and not talk. And then it was just them writing on the whiteboard. And like that just
mm.
did not work for my brain. Like it was
No,
not,
exactly. And I was the same. I mean, the world is changing, isn't it? I mean, look how we're communicating with each other now. You know,
yeah.
if I'd been given the opportunity to recite, you know, when I'm doing exams and I'm having to remember things, um, that's where I'd struggle getting it from my head onto the paper. I'd lose it on the
Mm,
way down, you know, to try and write it. Or my brain would work so fast that when I'm writing, I'm not able to keep up with my brain. So then it's getting muddled. If I had been able to do an exam like this, for example, where I'm communicating verbally, I
mhm,
would have been able to go into a lot more detail. I would have been able to recite a lot more things. You know, when I was in my training, for example, and I'd go to supervision, I wouldn't be right. I wouldn't take the written notes in because I know me and I know that I would lose it. I wouldn't remember the client session as well. So I'd
mhm.
go in and I would be able to recite the verbatim from my head rather than from the paper. So if I could have done exams like that, I would have achieved a lot higher grades.
Yeah, and I agree that the testing of people, that needs to change as well, because
Mm,
it is very much like memorize things and regurgitate it. It doesn't necessarily show a mastery or an understanding of the subject material. And I
mm,
think that's a real flaw with a lot of educational systems, and I hope to see that change. And it was one of the things that drew me to the training program where you were my instructor, was that there was less emphasis on the academic,
mm,
and that I knew that we were going to be marked on being observed, like in
mm,
action, like working with clients, and papers. And I like writing is, for me, I'm always like, cool, right? Give me an essay, that's fine. I can like, look at it from all angles and, negotiate with it, whatever. But so that was one of the reasons why I chose that program over some of
mhm.
the master's programs that I was looking at that were like super academic. And I was like, I don't know if I have this in me.
Yeah,
So,
exactly. With the counselling training, it's so important to be able to critically analyze what's going on and think about it from all different angles and then show your understanding. It's not, you can't just tell me the theory. That's not enough. You need to be able to show me that you understand how the theory applies to you and how it applies to the client and how it's going to show up in the room, and you know what the blocks might be, and you need to be able to look at it from all different angles, you know. And one of the strengths of people with neurodivergence can be at times being able to see all of those different things at once at the same time. And sometimes
Yeah.
that's real strength for them in this kind of training.
Yeah. And also, so you are dyslexic, correct?
Dyslexic and dyspraxic.
Wow. Okay. So how did you discover that? When did you learn that?
Interestingly enough, I was tested for it throughout primary school and have no real recollection of that. I mean, I think I remember going to what was the Springfield Hospital at the time. They did
Mhm.
something for children where they helped with coordination and things. I remember going there for a week, but I don't really remember any of the assessments or anything that I had. But when I actually got to my counselling training, I always knew that I had dyspraxia because I just would walk into things as a child, or but I didn't know about the dyslexia, and I needed to prove. I had to show something when I went to my counselling training. I can't even remember why, and I went to the GP for those records. And ironically, I was born in those years of the crossovers where it went from handwritten to computers.
Oh
So
God.
so
Yeah.
all of my stuff was scattered, but the doctor found these handwritten notes and gave them to me. And that's where I discovered that not only was I dyslexic as well, but I had reports saying that, you know, they weren't even expecting me to be able to be capable of doing my GCSEs. So I went to the doctors and got this information and found out that, I wasn't expected to do GCSEs or anything. And I think
Wow.
not knowing that, or maybe just my personality type, I don't know, being able to focus on what I could do rather than what I couldn't, it didn't get in my way. And I've come out, I have a degree. So sort of none of that really made a difference. I mean, I know that I struggled most with the writing of the papers, right? But I didn't struggle when it came to doing the job or teaching or even marking assignments. I could do all of that fine.
Yeah, I mean, I think everyone who trained with me would actually be really surprised to hear this because you're so like you literally you would do an assessment of like something we were struggling with a client or something in our personal life, and you just hit the nail on the head every single time. You're able to sum it up, and we all are always in awe of your knowledge and your skill and your like boundaried being with timing and everything, like starting on time and all of that. Like this history is amazing, like to hear. Like it's quite surprising
And
actually.
I
So
think if you're allowed to sort of lean into your strengths, it really helps. So, for example, what you were saying, when I'd watch your skills work, or I'd hear something that you'd be bringing to class, one of the things that I can do is visualize things. So think when we maybe be talking about linking theory to client work or whatever it was, or seeing skills work, I'd see it like a video playing, and it would be like the information would just drop into the video, so it would all come very fast. So I'd then be able to piece it together to then reflect it back to you quite quickly. So
yeah.
I guess if I sort of it compensates the things that I couldn't do, because in the area of the job that I do, the skills I need, I've got.
Yeah, and I think also it speaks really highly. There must have been a very loving or multiple very loving people around you when you were young, so that you didn't focus on your sort of shortcomings, if you will, that helped you hone in on your strengths, because that will be a very nature versus nurture kind
Mm,
of situation that, even as a therapist, you would hear, because a lot of people are so skilled at certain things, but it's not, the subject that mommy and daddy wanted them to do, or,
mm,
and so they're really down on themselves because like they're bad at math, but actually they're like a gifted artist. And like, so to be able to thrive in your strengths,
mm.
um, that really, there must have been, I wonder if that was your grandfather or just all of the adults that you were blessed to have around you growing up.
I mean, I was very lucky. I did have, I had, as I say, my granddad. I had parents who didn't put that kind of pressure on me. To be honest, they were happy with whatever I wanted to do. I mean, they were anxious. Particularly, my mum was anxious about me going into. I think at one point I wanted to do become a social worker when I was very young. I was thinking about that, and she'd get very anxious about that because I was naturally quite caring. So she'd sort of try and steer me away from going into a job that was sort of emotionally heavy, shall we say. But I had aunts. I had a second mum, shall I say, whose children grew up a few doors down from me, and there was 8 of us kind of grew up together, and she was a huge influence as well. So I had lots of that, and that I think counteracted the more negative experience that I had maybe with teachers, or when I went into my first jobs, for example, where I'd come up against. When I look back on it now, I can see a little bit of ageism, and I can see a little bit of envy. I don't know if it's the right word, but sort of wanting to attack the part of me that just knew what my strengths were and being able to just do that. One thing, whether we say it's nature or nurture, I've always been quite headstrong. So, when I knew what I wanted to
I
do,
can
and
relate.
yeah, and it didn't occur to me that these difficulties might stop me. So I was like, oh, I can't do it that way. Okay, let's go round this way and see how I can get to where I want to be. So even when obstacles were put in my way, my brain just didn't compute that I had to listen to those things. I mean, they obviously got in sometimes. I question myself sometimes, but I was so headstrong that I knew the kind of the direction I wanted to go in, and I'd sort of find a way round it, and I'd get to where I wanted to go.
Yeah, the refusal to see obstacles as a roadblock, right? And I
Mm,
actually think that that's quite like an entrepreneurial kind of
yeah.
gift because if it was easy, everyone would do it. So now you're embarking on this journey of starting this training school,
Mm,
um, which I'm sure is not like, oh, I'm just gonna do this. I'm just gonna launch some courses and like we'll see what happens. Can you tell us a bit more about what courses you're gonna be offering and like
mm, mm.
who would be the ideal candidates to come and train with you?
Yeah, so I've got a supervision course starting in June. That's post qualification, so that's for therapists that have been working for a while and have gained enough experience to move into training as a supervisor. So that starts in June, and then from September I'll be starting sort of the level 2, which is entry level, which is really designed as sort of a shorter diploma, and it's designed to sort of help enhance your basic communication skills. So you don't necessarily have to want to be a counsellor to come in and do that one. That helps with all sorts of jobs, lots of lawyers or doctors, or anyone that's in a job where we need to have communication skills, come on and do that. Then the level 3 diploma kind of goes in a bit more detail about the different types of modalities, so people get a better idea about the direction they might want to go in their qualification training. And then after the level 3, we go into sort of level 4 and 5, and that's when you can choose the modality, and that's when you start working with clients and get your qualification.
Nice, exciting. Okay, well, so anyone who's listening, June is when the first cohort starts. So more information for that will be on Lizzie's website, which I will also link in the show notes, all of the website information. Reflecting on your career up and your life developmentally up to this point, can you think of, what maybe like your lowest point was, and what advice you would give to yourself now, present day you, to yourself in that lowest point?
I think it was some of the schools I worked in where um, I'd sort of come up against in schools there can be this sort of segregation of the kind of the job that you do, and it's difficult when it crosses over. And so the teaching staff, for example, would sometimes, how do I describe it, struggle with the creativity that I could bring to the job and the relationship that I could build with the children. And because I was young, I couldn't see their treatment of me as being that. I saw it as, oh, maybe I'm not very good at this job, maybe I shouldn't be doing it. So it would make me question, and it would make me question whether doing that sort of creative and adjusting things to meet the child's needs was, I mean, as I'm saying it, I'm like, why am I even saying this? Like I'd be thinking, oh, is that the right thing to do? Because I'm coming up against such
Opposition.
opposition
Yeah.
from it, and it really put me off working in schools. And but I really like the teaching side of it, so that's why I had that sort of internal conflict. And I think if I look back now, I think I would have said to myself, sort of, be sure in what your skills are, look at the results that you're getting, rather than listening to what other people are telling you about what you can do. And I think I probably would have maybe done this a lot sooner.
Yeah, I mean and this has come up in so many episodes. Um it's really like it's like listening to your intuition, right? Listening to your inner voice and not letting, because there's always going to be people with big opinions that appear as kind of like roadblocks, really, or like obstacles along the way. And it's about knowing yourself, trusting your inner voice, and being able to proceed and really like not take advice from people who haven't been on your journey, right? They're not doing what you're doing. So
Yeah.
um, I think it's really wonderful that now you're able to combine all those things and you've started your own training school. It's going to be like, it's so unique, right? So
Yeah.
well done.
Thank you.
Um, yeah, so if people want to reach out to you, best place is your website. Is there
Yeah.
social media that you would like people to find you on?
Um, I've got the Instagram account, which now you're asking me, I can't remember the name of.
Which we're working on.
Yeah, we're working on. I guess the best place is the website, or to email me. My phone number's on the website if you want to have any more information, or just email me at info@aphrodite.com, and you can ask any questions that you want there, or contact me through there. It's probably the easiest way at the moment.
Okay. Okay, well, thank you very much, Lizzie. It was nice to hear a bit more about you. And I'm sure everyone will be excited to hear this. So thank you so much and
Thank you.
have a wonderful rest of your day.
You too. Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening to this week's episode of Career Congregation. I hope it gave you something to think about or inspired you in some way. If you enjoyed this conversation, please take a moment to like, subscribe, or share this episode with someone you think it might resonate with. Every bit of support helps. If you know someone who you think would make a great guest, please send them my way via the link in the show bio. And if you'd like to support the show and the work that I do, you can buy me a coffee via the coffee link also in the show bio. Thanks again, and I'll see you next week for another conversation about all things career.